This picture was taken after a tragic freeway accident involving two different trucking companies. The story behind this image is shocking, and the fallout for the trucking industry is felt to this day. I'm Brandon with United Commercial Insurance, and today I'm going to be walking us through the accident, the events leading up to it, and the legal disputes that followed due to the actions of the truck drivers involved. On the evening of September 4th, 2017, Russell Rodatango, a driver for AJD Business Services, was traveling southbound on Interstate 95, just outside of Jacksonville, Florida. What started as an ordinary drive quickly turned into a disaster. At around 9:10 p.m., Rodatango's truck collided with an RV that was towing a vehicle. The impact was severe. His truck overturned, blocking multiple lanes of the interstate. To make matters worse, the RV's towed vehicle caught fire, creating a dangerous and chaotic scene that left the highway completely shut down. Traffic quickly backed up, creating a mile-long stretch of stranded vehicles. That's sort of the setup that we're going to right now. Subsequent, there's two collisions that are involved in this accident or in this event. So 80 minutes or about an hour and a half after the initial accident occurred, another semi-truck operated by Connor Dzion Carrier Inc. This is a carrier out of Canada. The driver being Yadwinder Sangha. So this second carrier, Connor Dzion Carrier, the driver Yadwinder was traveling at nearly 70 miles an hour south on I-95 and had decent visibility. In fact, the report said despite having 50 seconds of visibility or of sight distance, meaning the driver had about a minute of time that he could see the pileup of cars or the backing up of cars. Despite that, Sangha failed to notice the stopped vehicles in time. And in fact, he did not apply the brakes on the semi-truck until just 1 second before impact, causing unfortunately a catastrophic collision. So the secondary crash is where most of the damage occurred. That crash involved 21 vehicles and resulted in over 20 injuries. And sadly, the most tragic of all of them was 18-year-old Connor Dzion, who was stopped waiting on the freeway among the vehicles in the traffic jam. He was killed and passed away in this collision. So let's discuss more on the victim. So the main victim in this case is Connor Dzion. Connor was a 18-year-old freshman in his second week of classes at the University of North Florida, recently graduated high school, and was traveling home from a visit to his girlfriend's house, traveling south, like we said, on I-95 north of Jacksonville. So as Connor was driving home, he got caught in that first accident, the accident caused by AJD. And so as he was stopped, waiting for the accident to get cleared, his mom was checking on his progress and looked up the Find My iPhone app, saw that he was stuck on the freeway in the accident and didn't know exactly what was happening. She left her house to travel to the scene of the accident. And this played a big part in the lawsuit. Connor's mom actually saw Connor after he had passed away in his second accident that was caused by Connor Dzion Carrier. And she arrived and saw the aftermath of his vehicle and that Connor had passed away. Now this played a big part because she didn't see him in the hospital, or I guess in a more sanitary setting. She saw the raw accident and kind of the carnage that occurred on the freeway. And this played a big part in why the jury awarded such a large verdict. So let's discuss the parties involved in this case. The plaintiffs were Melissa and David Dzion, the parents of Connor Dzion, who passed away in the accident. If you're looking at this case from a legal perspective or from a trial bar attorney perspective, these plaintiffs represented the quote-unquote perfect plaintiffs. Connor was a freshman in college, recently graduated from high school. The parents, Melissa specifically, ran to the scene and saw the gruesome accident and her son being involved. Her son really was just starting his young career in college and had been doing nothing wrong, just waiting for the accident to clear up. So the plaintiffs were, in a lot of ways, if you're looking at it from a legal perspective, very ideal selection to defend or to represent as an attorney. There were multiple lawsuits filed, and these lawsuits were towards the defendants, AJD Business Services, the company that caused the first accident, and then the second defendant was Connor Dzion Carrier, or the driver that was operating the vehicle that struck or caused the accident that led to the death of Connor Dzion. So let's discuss each one of those defendants. The first defendant was AJD Business Services. AJD Business Services is a trucking company based in Staten Island, New York, and they came under intense scrutiny during this trial. These guys were the worst trucking company to defend in this particular case as an insurance carrier or as an attorney. It was revealed that the company had engaged in numerous unethical or even illegal practices. So AJD operated in an irregular manner. They would pay drivers oftentimes in cash to avoid taxes. They would instruct drivers to avoid or circumvent way stations and drive beyond oftentimes their legal hours of service. The driver in this case for AJD was Russell Rodatango. Russell had a disturbing history of traffic violations, including distracted driving, speeding, and previous rear-end accidents. So he had a long list of violations on his driving record. On the night of the accident, Rodatango was operating over his hour of service limit and admitted to looking at his cell phone just before the collision. So all of these things layered on top of each other added to the negligence that played a significant part in the jury's decision on how much they awarded in that case against this particular defendant, AJD. Rodatango, in addition to his traffic violations, had a lengthy criminal history, including multiple convictions for robbery, which added to the narrative of recklessness in hiring and irresponsibility in hiring of AJD Business Services. The second defendant in this case is Connor Carrier, a motor carrier based out of Montreal, Quebec. They were implicated due to the actions of the driver, Yadwinder Sangha. So this company had a really tough time defending themselves because they were alleged, or the driver, Yadwinder, was allegedly beginning his 25th hour on duty when the fatal crash occurred. So that violation, such a gross negligence when traditionally speaking, you should only be on there for 11 hours on a normal situation. He was starting his 25th hour on duty, and you can imagine being on for a full day plus 1 hour and how that affects your ability to stop a speeding motor vehicle on a freeway. The driver, Yadwinder, was found to have been grossly negligent despite having ample sight distance. As we discussed, he only applied his brakes 1 second before the impact. There was also an allegation that Yadwinder was unable to read English, which may have contributed to his failure to understand road signs and warnings leading up to the accident. But ultimately, his negligence and failure to adhere to safety regulations and stopping his vehicles was a critical factor in the case, leading to the significant liability of Connor Carrier in the jury's awarding. Legal proceedings. There were multiple lawsuits filed by Melissa and David Dzion after the accident. They filed both against AJD Business Services and Connor Carrier. Both Melissa and David sought damages for the wrongful death of their son and for emotional distress. The lawsuit alleged that both trucking companies were negligent, highlighting the violations of hours of service, as we discussed, and the lack of proper driver background checks and failure to maintain safe working environment in AJD's case. Connor's insurance carrier, Northbridge General Insurance Corporation, initially paid out policy limits as part of the settlement. The early settlement indicated an acknowledgement of liability and a desire to avoid prolonged litigation. The Dzion family reached an agreement with Connor Carrier, Inc., which resulted in an amended final judgment of $74 million for damages, plus an additional $1.875 million in attorney fees and costs. AJD's legal strategy was a stark contrast to Connor's legal strategy. AJD initially resisted any settlement demands, and they contested their liability. Their defense included challenging the admissibility of certain evidence and seeking to exclude prejudicial material. The prejudicial material that they seek to exclude included Connor Dzion's body photos at the scene of the accident, references to past driving offenses of their driver, Russell, and this is where it gets interesting, any mention of AJD's alleged connections to organized crime. So you can imagine the plaintiff's attorney was licking his chops to get in there and show the jury all of the litany of problems that AJD was operating their company with. Anyway, AJD wanted to mitigate any potential damage that the attorneys could throw their way during the trial, and they wanted to control the narrative a little bit more in the case when it went to trial. However, the judge ruled against all of their motions to exclude evidence, allowing the plaintiff's attorney to show the jury all of the problems that AJD had in the past, any of the accident photos, including Connor's body, very graphic photos. Now, once the judge ruled against AJD, the insurance carrier for AJD requested the attorneys representing AJD to leave the case and exit. Once they exited, AJD was left without representation and led them to default on several key aspects of the case. When the case was brought to trial, the plaintiff's case included testimony from expert witnesses who discussed trucking industry standards, hours of service violations, and the psychological impact of the accident on the Dzion family. Evidence presented painted a picture of gross negligence, especially on the part of AJD Business Services, as we discussed, which contributed significantly to the jury's decision to award punitive damages. In addition to what we had discussed, there were claims against AJD regarding spoliation of evidence, suggesting that the company may have destroyed or failed to preserve critical information related to this accident. This further damaged AJD's position and credibility with the court, as you can imagine. The verdict. The jury found AJD Business Services particularly culpable in this case, awarding $900 million in punitive damages. This was a clear message from the jury, emphasizing the severity of AJD's conduct or misconduct and the need for a deterrence for any trucking or motor carrier in the future. The total verdict amounted to $1,002 million, which included compensatory damages for the Dzion family's emotional distress and wrongful death claims. Post-trial, both AJD Business Services and Kakashan Carrier filed motions to set aside the verdict, arguing that the damages were excessive and the procedural errors occurred during the trial. These post-trial motions highlighted ongoing disputes regarding the fairness of the trial and the application of legal standards. Both of these companies were fairly small carriers and had no ability to pay past their insurance carrier coverages, and their post-trial motions were an attempt to persuade the court to set aside the punitive damages in this case. Conclusion of legal proceedings. The legal proceedings in this case were complex and high stakes, involving numerous pretrial motions, strategic withdrawals, and high-impact testimonies. The outcomes not only provided some measure of justice for Connor Dzion's family, but also sent ripples through the trucking industry, highlighting the critical need for adherence to safety standards and ethical practices when hiring drivers, safety as a culture, getting home safe to all corporations, not just the largest ones. Damages awarded. Let's discuss the damages awarded. A $1 billion verdict is a massive amount of money, and it's unlikely that the parties awarded the punitive damages and the legal fees collected the total amount. But let's discuss the breakdown of where that money went and who it was awarded to. Starting out, for negligent infliction of emotional distress, Melissa Dzion was awarded $16 million. For wrongful death, Melissa Dzion was awarded $49 million, and Connor's father, David, was awarded $37 million. Under punitive damages, AJD Business Services was charged with $900 million in punitive damages, an amount so incredibly high, there's no possible way that they'll ever pay that off. For the total verdict being $1,002 million awarded to both Melissa and David Dzion. Post-trial developments. Let's discuss for a moment the fallout from the trial of a $1 billion verdict. So after the plaintiff's attorneys won that $1 billion verdict, they went on sort of a publicity tour advertising the results of this particular case. If you're injured in an accident involving a semi, you could get up to $1 billion. So this sparked what you may see an advance in what we call the reptile theory of many plaintiffs' attorneys, where they're looking for particular accidents that match similar conditions that we went over today. A plaintiff that is innocent in every way, shape, or form, that was unduly injured, either killed or severely maimed or injured for life. And then a defendant who is negligent in a lot of different ways, not only in hiring practices, but in operations. And so as plaintiff's attorneys search for these, they're going to put up billboards, they're going to do Google search advertising, they're going to filter through and call all accidents that are involving semi-trucks and trucking industry or any commercial auto situation where they can attack the defendant and layer on the negligence that this particular company has and go after the insurance companies to collect as much money as possible. You may see in a town near you advertisements and billboards that show, have you been injured in an accident involving a semi? They're all over the country, and it's a huge problem in the trucking industry that is causing insurance rates to go up, where there are bad actors like AJD Business Services and Connor Dzion, who was operating at 25 hours of service. Not all carriers are like this, and some are just at the accident, could be pulled in as contributory negligence. And so the far-reaching effect of this case is being felt today in so many insurance company renewal pricing that has to account for representing carriers in either frivolous lawsuits or massive lawsuits that are related to this reptile theory and plaintiffs' attorneys that are attacking these sort of situations. The purpose of this video is to discuss with business owners in general the importance of understanding the environment that you're operating in on a day-to-day basis. At any time that you could be driving through whichever state, you could be the subject of a large event, large lawsuit, and any one of those expenses, both insurance on not being eligible for renewal, operational expenses, or punitive damages, could put you out of business. That's such an important thing to understand. If you came into the industry in the 90s, in the 2000s, the 80s, or in the early 2010s, it's a completely different environment that you're used to operating in. It's important that you remember there are regulations out there. You have to adhere to those regulations, but more importantly, develop a culture of safety in your organization, and you should be able to navigate the waters, the dangerous waters that are trucking and business in 2024. These are just some examples of what has happened, albeit extreme examples, billion-dollar verdicts of what happened or has happened to other trucking companies in the past. Please be aware of them. Please learn from their mistakes and be safe on the road and be safe in your company. Thanks for tuning in. Brandon with United Commercial Insurance. Give us a call and we can talk to you about your company and we can give you a quote. Signing off.